Ever feel like history was playing a huge prank on you? Like, oh, you thought you knew how the Founding Fathers' stories went. Buckle up, Buttercup.
Right. It's amazing how we get these pictures in our heads.
And then there's Alexander Hamilton.
Exactly.
This is not your typical powdered wig and a silver spoon story.
Not even close.
We're talking born out of wedlock,
Yeah.
orphaned young. I mean, come on. Raised on a tiny Caribbean island. Talk about an underdog story for the ages.
And talk about a stack of material we've got to sort through. Biographies, historical accounts, even some of Hamilton's own letters, which are unbelievable, by the way. Just incredible writing.
Seriously, how did one guy cram so much into one life? But okay, let's rewind to the beginning.
To the Caribbean.
Right. No revolution just yet.
Not quite. It's the 1750s, and we're talking about a totally different world than what we usually picture with the Founding Fathers. Think bustling ports, this incredible mix of cultures.
Okay, so not exactly a sleepy little island. No, not at all. But also, we have to acknowledge the elephant in the room, right? This is the 1750s in the Caribbean. The slave trade is everywhere. It's inescapable.
Yeah, several of our sources really hit on that point. It wasn't just a side note, it was the reality of the time.
Exactly. And it's impossible to understand Hamilton's story without understanding that context. It shaped everything. Even later on, you can see its influence in his writing, in his complex and sometimes really conflicted views on slavery itself.
Yeah, good reminder that history is rarely black and white. No pun intended. Okay, so we've got this Caribbean backdrop, but even beyond that, it sounds like Hamilton's childhood was rough, to say the least.
Understatement. Okay, imagine this. You're a young boy, abandoned by your father.
Heartbreaking.
And then when you're, what, 11? Maybe 13? Historians are still a little fuzzy on the exact year.
Adds to the mystery, I guess.
Right. But the point is, you lose your mother, too.
Oh, man. Talk about a 1-2 punch.
And it wasn't just losing his parents. It's losing that stability, that social standing, everything.
Brutal. And then on top of that, some sources even suggest she couldn't even get proper schooling.
Yeah, between the family's finances being a mess and the stigma attached to his birth, formal education was kind of out of reach.
So how does he go from, like, a kid with almost no opportunity to Alexander Hamilton, founding father? I mean, what happens?
It's honestly pretty remarkable. He basically becomes this self-taught prodigy, just devours every book he can get his hands on, like insanely hungry for knowledge.
But how do you even do that with limited resources? I mean, we're not talking about Wikipedia and online libraries here. This is 1700s St. Croix.
This is where a Presbyterian minister named Hugh Knox comes in. He had this library, and it basically became Hamilton's sanctuary.
Okay, so mentorship, always a good thing.
Right. Knox saw something special in him, really nurtured his intellect, recognized how important that access to knowledge was for him.
So we've got future founding father Hamilton in the making. He's got this incredible mind, but he's still stuck in St. Croix. So how does he get from point A to, revolution?
Well, that's where things take a turn for the dramatic. 1772. Massive hurricane. I mean, we're talking devastating. The levels of the island of St. Croix.
Okay, but hurricanes happen.
Sure, but here's the thing. In the aftermath of this storm, young Hamilton, he sits down and he writes this letter.
Oh, this is the letter. I've heard about this.
This isn't just any letter. It gets published in a local paper and people are blown away. The detail, the imagery, the way he captures the storm's power.
They realized they had a star on their hands.
Exactly. They were like, this kid can write. And not just write, like he was thinking about things on a different level. His observations, the language he used, people recognized that this was someone special.
So what? They just put him on a ship to New York? Like, go be great somewhere else?
Pretty much. A bunch of local benefactors, they pool their money and they ship him off to New York City to get a real education.
Wow. I mean, talk about a life-changing hurricane. That's wild.
Right. And that's how he ends up at King's College, which we know now as Columbia University.
The epicenter of, well, everything about to happen in the colonies.
And the rest, as they say, is history.
So we've got young Hamilton, fresh off the boat, basically, lands in New York City, and boom, revolution's brewing.
And he jumps right in.
No time for sightseeing, I guess.
No time at all. He's writing these fiery pamphlets, giving speeches at political clubs. I mean, the guy's barely out of his teens, and he's already making waves.
And making enemies, too, right? Some of our sources mentioned a near brawl with some loyalist students.
Oh, yeah, he was never one to back down from a good debate. Or a heated argument, for that matter.
But, I mean, it's not all talk, right? He actually gets involved in the revolution, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think it's fascinating how his early experiences, even back in St. Croix, start to connect the dots here.
Okay, so rewind back to Hamilton the clerk. What does that have to do with fighting for independence?
It's about perspective. Think about it. He wasn't just reading about economic theory, he was living it. Managing ledgers, dealing with trade, seeing the impact of a stable currency or the lack thereof.
So that hands-on experience, that's what shaped his views.
Absolutely. He had this innate understanding of how money and power were intertwined. And don't forget, those early mentors he had, the merchants who saw his potential.
Oh, right, like Nicholas Kruger.
Exactly. They gave him invaluable experience, showed him the ropes.
It's like a masterclass in finance. But instead of a classroom, it's the real world.
Right. And that's what sets Hamilton apart. It's this blend of practical experience, relentless self-education. By the time the revolution kicks off, he's not just a skilled writer, he's a strategic thinker, a leader.
And one that catches the eye of a certain General Washington. Our sources mention their paths crossed early on.
And the rest, as they say,
is history. Okay, but seriously, what was their relationship like?
Well, that's a story for another deep dive. But what's important here is that Hamilton had a knack for cutting through the noise, for organizing chaos. And let's be real, the early days of the war were chaotic.
To say the least. So what, he was like Washington's right-hand man?
In a lot of ways, yeah. Writing battle plans, drafting correspondence. But it went beyond that. Remember those diplomatic skills he honed in the Caribbean? All those different cultures, languages?
Oh, right. He had to learn how to navigate those waters early on.
Exactly. And those skills proved essential during the war. He was sent on missions, negotiating treaties, securing alliances, a one-man diplomatic corps.
Wow, it's like everything in his life, every challenge, every odd job was preparing him for this moment.
And that brings us to what's arguably his most significant contribution. His legacy, really, Alexander Hamilton, architect of the American financial system.
From a Caribbean clerk to the nation's first Secretary of the Treasury, talk about a glow-up.
It's pretty incredible. But here's the thing. Imagine the state of the new nation after the war. Crippling debt, different states with their own currencies, no credibility on the world stage.
Sounds like a recipe for disaster, honestly.
It could have been. But Hamilton saw an opportunity. He understood that a centralized financial system, that was the key.
Okay, so what did he do?
He championed a national bank, a unified currency, policies designed to promote economic growth. He was thinking long-term, strategically.
So he took the chaos of the revolution and basically said, hold my beer, I got this.
Pretty much. He drew on his experiences, his knowledge, this unshakable belief in the potential of the new nation.
I bet not everyone was on board with his ideas, though, right?
No, absolutely not.
Oh.
His vision was bold, even radical for the time.
I can imagine. We're talking about literally writing the financial rule book for a brand new country.
And this is where those years of self-education, those countless hours in Knox's library, they paid off. Hamilton didn't just have ideas. He could articulate them, defend them. He was a force to be reckoned with.
It's amazing, right? You think about those early years, all those hurdles he had to overcome.
And yet here we are, centuries later, still feeling his influence.
It's like those ripples in a pond. They just keep going.
Exactly. And speaking of ripples, it's hard to ignore the parallels to today. I mean, Hamilton's story, it resonates so strongly with the whole idea of the immigrant experience.
Mm-hmm. Right. And not just in our sources. It seems like it's everywhere these days.
Totally. You have this individual, driven, ambitious, determined to make it in a new land. The odds are stacked against him, but he finds a way.
And not just to survive, but to thrive, to shape the very fabric of this new nation. That's a powerful message.
Incredibly powerful. And of course, you have to be careful about drawing direct lines across centuries, but still.
The core message is there. Resilience, ambition, the power of carving your own path, even when it's unconventional.
Exactly. And I think that's something we can all relate to, right? That idea that potential isn't always obvious. It can be hidden, unexpected.
Forged in those fires of hardship, as they say.
Right. It takes a certain kind of person to not just survive those fires, but to come out stronger. And a bit of luck never hurts either.
Always a factor.
Yeah.
But as we wrap up here, I think the big takeaway, at least for me, is this. Never underestimate the power of a determined mind.
Couldn't agree more. The thirst for knowledge, the courage to seize those opportunities. That's what sets people like Hamilton apart.
From a tiny island in the Caribbean to the heart of a revolution.
It's a reminder that history isn't just dates and names in a textbook.
Yeah.
It's about people, their struggles, their triumphs.
And that those stories, they still have the power to inspire us today, centuries later.
Absolutely. So the next time you're feeling stuck or like the odds are stacked against you, just remember Alexander Hamilton.
There you go. All right, folks, that's it for our deep dive into the early life of Alexander Hamilton. Hope you enjoyed it.